Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Of course, I'm your host, Montel Williams. Today we have an enlightening discussion planned around Florida Amendment 3 and the broader implications of cannabis legalization. Joining us is Moriah Barnhart, co-founder of the Cannabis organization, which supports mothers advocating for medical use and legalization of cannabis. Moriah is also a lead advocate with WISE, a group dedicated to education and economic initiatives related to cannabis policy reform. Moriah, it's so great to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Montel. It's been a while, but I'm excited.
For sure. Well, let's jump right in to Florida Amendment 3, the marijuana legalization initiative. It's on the ballot this coming November. If passed, it will legalize adult use cannabis for adults over the age of 21 and older. And walk us through it. It legalizes you having up to 3 ounces, I believe, in your possession at any given time. So walk us through it. Do you get to grow? Walk us through the entire initiative.
So Florida is under a strict single subject rule, which means you may only address one individual subject at a time. So one of the first big complaints about this amendment was that it doesn't include home grow. And then some of the complaints that came later, all of them revolve around the fact that this amendment simply cannot do anything other than legalize adult use. So it is in Florida, one baby step at a time.
Okay, so in that legalizing for adult use, you could include the piece in there that talks about having an amount of cannabis or possessing an amount of cannabis?
Well, in fact, some of the attorneys, including attorneys who previously sat on the Supreme Court in Florida, believed that it would not pass Supreme Court muster without that. So while legalizing adult use, it is a certain amount of adult use possession for 21 and up. And those were the caveats that it must include.
And then I guess it must have also included how this becomes available to the public. So the existing stakeholders that already own licenses would be the only people available or able to sell in an adult use market?
I believe, as do many of the attorneys that I initially discussed this with, probably back when it was being drafted, that it does absolutely not close the market. The legislature in Florida closed the market after Amendment 2 was legalized via constitutional amendment. And the legislature will be in charge of whether or not the market remains closed or becomes open.
And, Florida is such a strange state when it comes to cannabis. I mean, I recently remember seeing something from this governor talking about raising the license application fee to some ridiculously exorbitant amount. Is that still on the books? Is that something that has to be done legislatively? Is that something that has to be done, as an amendment? What?
No, they've already done that legislatively. So the state is already set to make millions upon millions of dollars from the existing license holders. They're they've issued 3 Pigfords and will issue 3 more Pigfords this coming year, which are the licenses that are set aside for Black farmers who sued the USDA and won, basically saying we were discriminated against and that harmed our economic capabilities in the agricultural industry. So the people that won those lawsuits decades ago are now, 90 years old. The one who won the first license passed away while that license was being issued. So 22 new licenses are coming after this. They were supposed to be announced theoretically by May, June, and now it's looking like they've asked the department to hold off until after the elections. So 22 more licenses will double from an original 22 plus the 6 Pigfords. 22 new licenses doubles the market pretty much overnight. And the state has made an immense amount of money from the current licensees. The upcoming licensees also had exorbitant fees to apply in the first place. And when you add on to that millions in tax dollars from adult use annually, the department is going to have a lot of extra money from cannabis.
And yet there are still those who are fighting this initiative, right?
Sure. it kind of surprised me to see some of DeSantis's initial arguments. I think every politician, especially when they stay in politics too long, comes to a fork in the road and they make mistakes. And often that involves underestimating the voters, right? It's very offensive to assume that the voters aren't intelligent enough to know how this works in Florida. So comments like, we're afraid that the state's going to start smelling like cannabis, well, the Republican supermajority trifecta legislature already banned public consumption under a medical program, meaning, my daughter would have to be very careful to have all of her medical emergencies in private. If you're going to have a seizure, don't have it at the store. You already can't use medicine in public. The idea that under adult use, recreational use, that they're not going to be even more strict about public consumption bans and things of that nature is just silly.
And I mean, let's follow this bouncing ball. I mean, if you go way back to the beginning when Florida first passed medical use, a lot of the people who received licenses were cronies of whatever the previous administrations were. And so now, are the new licenses, would they take a long time to actually be implemented?
For the issuance of licenses, it has been being drug on for quite some time. The license holders themselves are under strict legislative mandates to be growing, producing, selling, all within very, very strict timelines. So you've got 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So they should be up and running theoretically. Some license holders, as you've seen, have found loopholes where they've sat on their licenses, you know, further restricting access for patients. The more competition, the better the products and the lower the prices, et cetera. But I do believe that of the 22 new licenses plus the 6 Pigford licenses, we will see a ton of new product, better quality and lower prices in Florida.
So, Mariah, tell me a little bit about what you think is going to happen in June. I mean, sorry, in November. Numbers have been running somewhere between what high 50% for, low 40% against. Do you think we're going to see an overwhelming flood of 70+ percentage of people who are going to vote for the initiative, or is it on the fence?
Well, as we moved towards summer and got more concrete polling going, we were actually polling at over 70% on the adult use issue in Florida. Now, Fox News in a state like Florida is, one of the most highly respected polling sources, and their most recent poll came in at 66%. And
Wow.
I think it's very telling that after our legislature learned that the majority of Floridians, Republicans and Democrats together, want this, that they use taxpayers, funds and time as elected officials to serve our will, to create political action committees like the Freedom Fund, specifically to oppose the will of the people.
Well, which is kind of crazy in the sense that we know that right now, what do we have, over 24, 26 states in the District of Columbia have adult use cannabis. Another 12 states have medical. So combined, we have 38 states in the District of Columbia that have some sort of medical legislation or some sort of legislation for cannabis use. And even though the legal market has been thriving and people don't talk about the amount of tax revenue that states have been getting off of it, the illegal market is ridiculously booming, especially here in the state of Florida. Do you think that legalization will impact the illegal market here?
Well, in Florida, under adult use, within the first couple of years, we're expected to be a 5 billion annual revenue industry. So that equates to several million in taxes being paid to the state. But what it also does is it gives an economic incentive for these companies to help enforce current law, right? So, like in Arizona, I saw a recent interview with one of the high up law enforcement officials that the illegal market actually started booming with the legal market. Now, it's very interesting. In that same interview, he stated that he knows because the legal corporations are contacting them to tell them about social media accounts that are, advertising these sales and whatnot. First of all, Montel, you and I both know the people that are making tremendous amounts of money from these operations globally, in the United States, in Florida, the ones who are using those funds to also fund child sex trafficking and other illegal, black market industries, those are not the people advertising on social media. So while you may have seen an uptick in courage of younger, less prominent figures, you are definitely seeing a reduction in the major crime.
Well, major crime, I agree with you, but I think when it comes to cannabis sales in America, I think back in 2021, we were looking at somewhere around $25 billion of cannabis being sold in the legal market in the United States and $70 billion worth of illegal cannabis being sold. So it's almost three times as much in the illegal market. I think Florida is probably running about the same times, at least 3 to 1, 4 to 1, based on what we've seen because it's been so restrictive in getting
Right,
licenses and
and
people
open
not.
markets are the solution to that. We've always known the idea behind capitalism is when you open markets, it takes incentive away from purchasing on an underground market. It takes money away from making that a living for yourself, or and so when the markets are strictly closed and the products that are available are very limited and the prices are very high, you are then encouraging a heightened, illegal market. So I don't know what Florida politicians have been thinking to date, but I hope they'll take that into consideration this coming session.
Yeah, organizations like Drug Free America and the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Yeah, I guess Florida Attorney General um, Ashley Moody has been very vocal about raising concerns about going through with this initiative. What are your thoughts on this kind of crazy divide where you've got one side of the coin actually getting funding from what's already happening, yet they are still against getting greater funding, which seems stupid.
I think that you're seeing this divide mostly between politicians and voters are starting to see it. Politicians who made nationwide names for themselves off of the back of medical freedom and freedom in general, we're starting to see that they don't really believe in freedom after all. Like I said earlier, underestimation of the voters' intelligence, in that the voters do not want to be told what to do. They don't need parents, they don't need guidance. They can make these decisions for themselves, and they've made it known that the war on drugs is a waste of time and money. It's harmful. It's the deadliest war the United States has ever waged, and it's been on its own citizens. And they're over it. They want it to end.
Well, when you look at they're estimating that if Florida passes this initiative in the first year, they could see sales between 4.9 billion and 6.1 billion alone in the first year. And right now, is there I don't know, is there a administrative rule of where those tax dollars from cannabis has to go in the state of Florida, or is it just used indiscriminately?
So the legislature up in Tallahassee will be in charge of that. We'll have hundreds of millions of dollars in additional revenue that I am sure will be allocated to education, youth prevention. Fortunately, that also gives us a lot of money for our schools, which we've needed for quite some time. Florida public schools, anybody who was born and raised here or has gone to school here or put their kids through school here knows how important it is to fund our public schools, and we need that extra money. We can't do without it, really, especially after COVID.
Sure. And I mean, now Florida requires, well, I guess what's called a supermajority, right? So it has to be 6%, 60% or greater is required to actually pass this, which is no small feat. What happens now between now and November 24th is really imperative. So what are you doing? What's happening at the grassroots level to get people to recognize it when they walk there? Forget it's not just a presidential election; it's an election and an opportunity to pass this in the state. What are you guys doing?
Well, as someone who wrote and submitted the Home Grow initiative, I do like to be transparent in that I am a home grow advocate. I believe strongly that adult use is the next baby step in that direction. And then you will see the following year initiatives for reciprocity. We already got telehealth, which we worked for over half a decade on. But there are other really important issues that come next. So this is the door opening to those other issues. Um,
Each one that will have to be voted on at subsequent elections.
Not necessarily. Once the legislature, I think this is the big door opening. Once the legislature has this in front of them, there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Just like with telehealth taking over half a decade just for the medical program, I think that reciprocity, home grow is obviously made to be a little bit partisan right now, which is silly. But it is an extreme medical need, especially for lower income, more vulnerable demographics. The sicker the patient, the more the need for lower cost products that don't have any pesticides, et cetera. So I think that those issues are actually going to be taken up in the legislature, or at least given more attention there. And we may not have to go all the way through a constitutional amendment.
What's been Governor DeSantis' position on this whole thing, adult use? I've not been able to figure it out. What is that? Well, of course, I think he's probably against that, right?
Yeah, so it really blows my mind that, as an elected official elected to fulfill the will of the people, that he would get this conservative Fox News poll that says 66% of Floridians want this. And instead of saying, personally, I have my own biases, but I am elected to fulfill your will. I now understand this is what you want. And it is my job, not as a leader, but as a servant, to fulfill your will. Instead, this freedom fund, this creating a PAC, having other high up government officials waste taxpayers' time and money on opposing what the taxpayers want. I'm not sure who's advising right now, but this isn't adding up, and I think that voters are starting to see it.
I mean, like I said earlier, there's in 24 states plus the District of Columbia. I said 26, but it's really 24 states. And the District of Columbia have already legalized adult use cannabis. Florida, however, remains, one of those few with an initiative process that is yet to achieve this milestone. Now, Ryan, how does Florida's potential legalization align with the broader national trend?
Well, we're seeing the dominoes fall. So this is how prohibition happened, right? There were some federal laws implemented starting with the Tax Act, and then you saw states start to follow federal footsteps. And so the exact same thing is happening in reverse now. And once you're over half of the United States moving in that direction, you get a rescheduling hearing, which is what's happening.
We're way beyond over half. And when you got 38 states plus the District of Columbia, we're way beyond half. It only takes 25 to hit half. And they still haven't done this. And this is really kind of strange considering the fact that other initiatives have passed, with fewer states aligned. But this one seems to be like hanging out there for some stupid reason. I think that's because, we don't have the support at the national level, even when it comes to Joe Biden. I mean, Biden still, until a year ago, just walked back the idea that cannabis was a gateway drug. If you take a look at the fact that this is going to be an initiative on the ballot for the 2024 elections, some believe that this is going to have a really incredible impact on the turnout of, let's say, even younger voters, younger demographics. What are your predictions? Do you think that you're going to see a lot more people coming out to vote, wanting to cast a vote necessarily on this and not on the presidential race, but they're going to, since they're in the booth, they'll pull the levers?
I do think that in any presidential election, of course, you see a higher turnout of certain demographics. In the state of Florida, we actually had more registered Democrat voters for many years, up until recent years, actually, which is ironic, right? We've been in this Republican supermajority trifecta for decades. So that tells you some of these registered voters are not actually voting. But now that this is a nonpartisan issue, now that people from all walks of life see the different harms of the war on drugs, see the economic benefits, there's a lot of different priorities for different voters. And everybody is really seeing that prohibition needs to end. Legalization is what comes next. I do believe that you're going to see what some people will refer to as single subject voters, but they're not single subject voters because they see that cannabis is actually about freedom, medical freedom, personal freedoms. It is a statement against the federal government's tyranny. It is a statement against politicians who refuse to fulfill the will of the people. So that one issue is actually a much broader set of issues that people will be voting on.
Yeah, and even that, I even believe that the single topic or the single issue voters, once in that booth and they see the other things in front of them, they check a block. They have to. They just feel compelled to go ahead and not just go check one block and turn it in. They'll check and check and check and check and check. So, now did Florida change their taxation rate? Will the tax or the is that isn't part of the bill? So is that an administrative thing that they could just say, okay, we're going
Absolutely.
to
Everything is going to be left up to the elected officials, the politicians, and the department. So the politicians will write bills that will give the department certain responsibilities. They will themselves implement certain rules. And this is just the voters saying, we want this. All of the infrastructure, whether the market's opened or closed, anything else, obviously we couldn't include in any one constitutional amendment more than one subject. So in that amendment, you're not seeing the other things that we would like to continue to advocate for: the reciprocity, the home grow, the veterans discounted cards, pediatric cards, etc. But everything that you're going to see that has to do with any law, public use, whether the state smells like it or not, um, education, all of that will be done in Tallahassee.
and just an aside. I mean, I think is this going to be one of these things where again, once passed, then they will go back. Has there been any proposals about what the taxation is going to look like if it is passed? Have you heard anything about that?
No, but there is no doubt that hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue will be a substantial amount of additional funding for some of the things they normally allocate these funds to, which education, like I said, is one of the number one priorities in most legal states that we've seen allocating these tax funds.
Wow. And when the legislators that are already in office set about their busy work of making more and more and more administrative rules, is there any public input into that?
There is sometimes, well, I would like to say to Florida voters that have a vested interest in anything to do with life here in Florida, you are always allowed a voice, whether that is handwriting letters in mass. Flooding politicians with letters is actually often very productive. Calling your legislators, showing up to Tallahassee when we announce that there will be meetings and public hearings. And then the department also often holds public hearings. So I would say people really need to be um, more mindful of our local politicians and our state politicians, because there are often announcements of public input and ways to make a difference.
I'm sure that, is there a website or is there someplace people can go if they want to support you and what you're doing? Why don't you throw that out right now?
Sure, wiseflorida.org, I think would be the best place to start. As you stated early in this conversation, I got into this because my daughter Dahlia was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 2. Watching her dying and being resuscitated and not having cannabis as an option led me to the formation of, the word and organization, Canna Moms, etc. Uh, but when people started telling me to stay in my lane as the mother of a sick child, I cannot turn a blind eye to my neighbors and all of the other issues of the war on drugs. So Wise Florida was really step one in moving the ball forward. Obviously, Wise America is more of the nationwide now that federal rescheduling is coming and advocacy needs to be done there. But Wise Florida is specifically regarding prohibition in the state of Florida and all of the many things left to advocate for. It doesn't end here.
I know we saw the governor of Maryland, do this mass expunge or I don't remember what it was, what legally it was termed, but he literally, I guess, expunged the records of lots of people in the state of Maryland who had been convicted of a cannabis charge. Do you see that happening in Florida?
I see. So even federal, you mentioned Biden. We've seen a lot of token moves, but no real change. Descheduling versus rescheduling. We knew that Schedule 3 was going to hand this to pharmaceutical companies, but there really was no other way we saw this happening. In the state of Florida, all of that is going to be left up to the legislature. So we will be advocating for that. We have previously seen and done these more expansive legal assistance types programs and things of that nature. Nonviolent offenders, part of adult use, is making sure that people aren't being imprisoned. Taking money away from the private prison system is why you're seeing so much money pumped into PACs in opposition to this. But we will be advocating for that, but we're going to need everybody to come forward and participate in that, because that's left up to the politicians.
And, for those that are out there on the fence, let's talk about some of the misconceptions about adult use cannabis that you think really need to be addressed so people can understand, where to kind of put themselves on one side of the fence or the other.
Well, one, like we talked about earlier, is that it, really enhances the illegal market. Now, that doesn't make sense in a common sense way, but it also doesn't make sense in statistics when you're talking about where the real dangers are, the real money, the real crime, these large syndicates. It is taking money away from them, which is step one. But I would say things like, children and the DARE program. Something the DARE program did that we've seen is it told kids all drugs were dangerous, but it told kids all drugs were equally dangerous. So kids who would smoke pot would then turn around and say, well, they lied to me about that, so maybe this pill isn't as dangerous as I think it is. Now we're seeing this fentanyl overdose epidemic, the opioid epidemic. We have to stop lying. Cannabis legalization has decreased opioid deaths, because if your kid dies from a drug overdose, there is no going back. There is no fixing a problem or sending them for help. It's over. And we cannot continue to let, our children, our neighbors' children, suffer for a war on drugs that we know for a fact was created out of racism and for economics. This war against the United States people has to end.
Absolutely. And again, one more time, throw out where people can go to help you if they want to reach out.
I would say go to wiseflorida.org, and we'll be having the conversation on adult use, home grow, reciprocity, and things that we can continue to do over the coming years to make sure that the conversation doesn't end here.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to add?
I would just say, a lot of misconceptions about this amendment. It cannot include anything other than a single subject. It does not keep a market closed, period. The legislature is in charge of that. It does nothing other than legalize a small amount of cannabis for people who are 21 and up in the state of Florida. It is not the end of the conversation. There is much more work to do, but we already have our sights set on next year and the year after, so we don't end here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Moriah, for being here and being so enlightening, letting people know what's going on. I'm a Floridian myself, so I'm looking forward to hopefully this initiative passing, and possibly even get involved in this the cannabis movement here in the state if it does pass. So, keep us posted, and love to have you back later on as we get closer to election night.
Yes, and I hope to see you in person again soon, but this is great catching up.
Absolutely. You stay well. Take care of that family. Love the family of yours, and we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for you, make sure you stay as knowledgeable as you can. Learn as much as you can. Reach out if you can to wise.org. .com or .org, Maya?
.org.
.org. Reach out to WISE and see how you can help them push this initiative forward. Need 60%. 60% is what the goal is. So come on, turn on out. Make sure you stay tuned to the next edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.